stores everywhere, guys. Dr. Joaquin and Bennett, we had an off week last week. That's my fault. I welcome a new life into the world. So, thank you.
Got a new name under the belt.
Exactly.
Aside from being a doctor, he is now dad.
Got the Nike Air Monarchs on just
really,
to prove it.
He really brought the dad shoes out.
Really got this all completely going, everybody. So, as many of us bud tenders and or just people in the world are fathers and parents, it's a very cool honor to be a part of the club now. Definitely learning each and every single day. Happy that have the opportunity to do all this. But guys, what we're here today to talk about is the opioid epidemic and why this is relevant now. We're not going to be hitting you with prop demonstrations today, but we're going to be talking about root cause and effect and some of the wars that cannabis is actually out there fighting, guys. We are troops in some very, very different battles, whether it's legal advocacy or medicinal and big pharma and some other stuff. So that's what we're talking about today.
Right at home.
Exactly. It's my wheelhouse as a pharmacist, guys. There's some relevant stuff going on in the world right now. Hydrocodone acetaminophen, otherwise known as Norco, is on a big time nationwide back order. So patients are going to be experiencing frustrations from pharmacies that really are too big to deal with this kind of back order right now at this incredibly busy time of year, on top of needing to meet their pain expectation management needs, right? And so you may find yourself at 3 a.m. talking to somebody who didn't get their dose of opioids, right? And really, really is suffering and going through it. Well, the first thing that we want to make sure that we have everybody aware of is, no, this is not that person's fault. The only people's fault, we'll get to that here, and that's, the guys like me back 30 years ago pushing hydrocodone and opioids out to the masses through Purdue Pharmaceutical and so forth, as you see these billion-dollar lawsuits and pharmacies themselves dispensing them, doctoring them, overprescribing them. United States, roughly, guys, has consumed 80% of the world's opioid supply in terms of the entire world, guys. We are consuming 80% of that. Is that not insane?
That made my skin crawl, literally. 80%? That is appalling.
And New Mexico, we are probably one of the more alarming portions of the United States data as it is. And, we could pull that up, but, what are the alarming statistics that really drive this, guys? So yes, right now, currently, there's a big time back order. There was an Adderall back order last year for a really long time, which caused some big time issues in terms of psych meds, mental health, and things like that. In the pharmacy space, it probably didn't translate into cannabis very well, but this is the perfect time, guys, to have that conversation with your family members, your caregivers, your providers about weaning off of opioids. Cannabis can really get those opioid doses down 50 to 80%, and we're going to teach you guys just how to have that conversation, how to do it, and why it's important. So check out some of these alarming statistics. Daily, 46 Americans lose their lives to prescription painkiller overdoses. Every day, 7,000 individuals seek emergency treatment for misuse of prescription opioids. In 2010, 1 in 20 Americans aged 12 and over used prescription painkillers non-medically. The scope of this, opioid sales have quadrupled from 1999 to 2010, paralleling a near quadrupling in overdose deaths in correlation. In 2010, the volume of opioids was enough to medicate every American adult around the clock for a month. The United States, with less than 5% of the global population, consumes, again, 80% of the world's opioid supply. Less than 5% of the people on Earth are consuming 80% of the opioids on Earth. Because why? We're going to get to it. Yes, pharma and the out of control regulations that this whole thing got into, and now
and money, obviously.
Exactly.
Everybody's in it for their money.
It's funny how such a healing thing like cannabis has been stigmatized, federally illegal for over 100 years now in the United States, just so, the big pharma crooks could get out there and distribute their opioids to 5% of the world population in an insane ratio there. So, guys, cannabis can be a really big healing thing. We're going to talk about how, particularly a balanced one-to-one approach, CBD and THC can be really the way to do it. We will show you guys the maps and through that. But, in terms of what is the true you know, core concept behind all of this. What is addiction? What are these mental health problems that lead to it? And I'm sure most of us are probably thinking already, but the word trauma, right? It's a big, important thing. Last year, on September 26, 2022, True, and in our partnership with Mesilla Valley Pharmacy, we had applied for our variance request to be next to the school. High Horse Cannabis Company was there, in full, advocating for pharmacists to be able to safely dispense cannabis, because you're already seeing, we're dispensing safely opioids, so on and so forth, all kinds of controlled substances next to that school. So this was the perfect opportunity to get cannabis in the same conversation as medicine regulated by medical professionals. So really, what was cool is that yes, we ended up winning 6-0 to City Council and got the manufacturing and dispensary operation open. We've got our little dispensary there, but really it's all about our farm true products, and that's what we get to push over here at High Horse Cannabis Company, and to be able to go so on and so forth, and get that all the way out there. And to be able to really get the message behind that, we fought for it. So either way, there's reasons for dosing, there's reasons for hitting the 1-to-1, there's reason for hitting all kinds of things, but we really should know the foundations of why people might even be showing up to the dispensary in the first place, right? Why they might be seeking cannabis as an alternative to something else. Why do people go there? And so this was eloquently spoken again by Joanna Bencomo, our city council, one of our city council members. And we're going to dive into this entire episode, guys, because this is what it's about. These are the conversations that really will make or break your customer and patient experiences there at the dispensary, and your patient discovery and getting to know them and getting to the bottom of things that are going on. So anyways, let me put this on the screen for y'all.
Mentioned here today. As a social worker, I want to tell you that the gateway to any substance use or abuse is actually trauma. Trauma that goes untreated, trauma and pain that goes unseen. And in fact, when you step back even further, often when that pain, trauma, whatever it is treated, often what has worked best for people is cannabis. What has been able to give people a thriving life after, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, has been cannabis. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's actually trauma that's the gateway to any abuse. I think if we continue, and somebody said it brilliantly, and I just want to echo it, that if we continue to make it harder for the legal industry to be successful, the black market will continue to thrive. And that is...
So she hits so many, nails on the head with this entire situation. The moral of the story there is trauma, right? And that's what we're really getting at. And so, discussing that, right, Bennett, we all have trauma different for everybody. Most human beings are likeliest to experience trauma by the age of 14. So it's important to keep that in mind, what might be causing the initial bouts of drug use or, seeking that behavior because of things like trauma. So again, where you get into trauma and you get into things like post-traumatic stress disorder, and really kind of trying to dissect those things and how maybe people are trying to mask symptoms of PTSD with opioids, while opioids are not even, really proven to manage pain for a long, extended period of time. They're just really physically addicting. So, that's just the mess that we get into here. And so let's talk about the real gateway of what happened back in the day before we move on to the next, informational little thing that we want to share with you guys. But, this is hilarious. And as hilarious as it is infuriating, I just want you guys to watch how America got into this mess of being the number one consumer of opioids on the planet with 5% of the population.
Overall, we've been controlled by propaganda, propaganda against cannabis and the propaganda to use opioids, and you'll see it.
Repeat are our best, strongest pain medications, should be used much more than they are for patients in pain.
I think this begins in the 1980s when groups of pain doctors, pain specialists in American medicine, we began to feel that we were treating pain very poorly. And they were right. We did a very bad job of treating pain. They began to make the argument that we could do a lot better job very cheaply because we had tools to treat pain, but we were afraid to use them. And these tools were narcotic painkillers. The 90s were the decade when we saw an enormous expansion in pharmaceutical sales reps. The nature of pharmaceutical marketing changed. Before it had been older guys, almost all of them guys in gray suits, who really studied the stuff and really knew the pills. Those older sales reps kind of faded away as the 90s went on, and they began to hire more and more and more. And the idea was you develop a blockbuster drug, and then you hire scads of new sales reps to go hawk them to doctors.
We doctors were wrong in thinking that opioids can't be used long term. They can be and they should be.
We began to be very demanding and to doctors that they fix us, and that the tools to fix us were these narcotic painkillers. Doctors began to feel all these pressures, an epidemic of pain. We're not treating pain right. All these sales reps, all these threats of lawsuit, and then patients on top of that. And it slowly, then not so slowly, doctors began to change their minds and began to very, very aggressively prescribe these pills. The first attempts were really to convince doctors that there was a new day dawning, that science now knew that there was no real addictive risk to these pills when they were used to treat pain.
There's no question that our best, strongest pain medicines are the opioids, but these are the same drugs that have a reputation for causing addiction and other terrible things. Now, in fact, the rate of addiction amongst pain patients who are treated by doctors is much less than 1%.
So as the 90s progress, you begin to see bizarre expressions of this. You go in for a routine surgery, yet the pain for that surgery is going to last 2, maybe 3 days. You're getting 30 days worth of pills. The pills were available to kids in the house. People use them for 2-3 days. They don't need them after that. And then 27 days worth of pills lingers around the house for the next 2 or 3 years to be abused.
In 1991, about 76 million prescriptions were given out. By 2013, that had tripled to 207 million. So doctors are handing this out, and we were told to do so because we wanted to treat pain.
So exactly, how messy and ugly does that really get? It really does, guys. So, we were basically, moral of the story, we were enabling, the approach to managing pain for a good 20 years, and we're barely coming out of that right now. We're in 2023. This was really peaking in that 2020, 2010 time. In about 2014, some of the regulations started to hit a little bit more deeper and more deeply. Chronic pain management, CDC guidelines started to finally recognize, but we're now, the CDC is treating an epidemic. So something that's already happened, right? So it's, we have to go and reverse that with 5% of the world's population consuming 80% of the, world's opioids, a physically addictive substance, so on and so forth, with big money, big pharma lobbying for it, trying to connect the dots of, whatever other legislation to help protect their scenarios and their profits, right?
Isn't it crazy to see the narrative that they try to put on cannabis, and then the clean narrative that they try and put on pain medication? And clearly, the people who actually use cannabis and the people that we see, constantly relying on their pain medications, it's a clearly opposite stack. The way they say that it's non-addictive and it's the better way to treat pain, what we're saying, we're screaming over here in the cannabis industry, and it's crazy. It's non-addictive, Ben Como said it the best, it's trauma. You can be addicted to eating junk food because of your trauma. It really stems from other things, and the way these people are feeding pills for their personal gain, for their personal pocket, this big pharma just needs a huge stop to it. And it starts with being educated and not letting them catch you ignorant.
Yep, and people will do many things to not discuss their trauma or hide it or whatever that may be. Maybe back in the day, people were hiding their trauma using cannabis because you couldn't talk about it in a legal light. And now in this state, most people are able to at least have the option. Not everybody has the option due to where they are employed, so on and so forth. But it is an option as a mechanism for healing. But really, we got to this point of trauma. If you're a guy, are you really ever going to talk about your trauma? Statistically, you're really not likely to talk about your trauma.
November is mental health awareness month, so check on your buddies.
Statistically, you're likely to self-medicate, right? What are you going to self-medicate with? Maybe something that's been sitting in the counter top for the last 3 years that is in there, right? Because you don't have to spend money because it's already there. You don't have to go get in a doctor's appointment because it's already there. People do it with their antibiotics, right? People do it with other things just than opioids. But, these are the bad habits that lead into substance abuse. The real gateway is opioids leading into heroin, right? That's that. And the gateway is, if you had pain post-surgical, if you have dental pain, those are the things that are leading into, this snowball effect of absolutely scoured communities with addiction and rampant
And
socioeconomic
when you can't
implications.
get it from a pharmacist, you resort to the black market. And at that point, it's a full-blown addiction. It's a full-blown epidemic, like Joaquin mentioned. And it all started with someone you trusted prescribing you something. It's a very crazy. We have to do our own research. We definitely have to make sure we're trying to fight this on our own. At home, if someone of your clients comes in and they express wanting to wean off, pain medications, this is where you're gonna learn how to assist, and it's educating yourself on the back ends and the ugly parts.
So, fact of the matter is, guys, cannabis can take those opioid doses down 50 to 80%. We'll continue to get into it, but we want to make sure that, holistically, we really do cover the problems and the root cause of the epidemic. We are battling the fact that, doctors went through some, bad prescribing times. This isn't a blanket statement for every doctor, and this isn't to start a war on doctors. Doctors are still doctors, guys, and they always will be, right? So, what we want to do is still be able to empower our providers locally, regionally, and beyond to accept cannabis into, their patients' treatment plans and to really consider it when you're looking at opioid doses in patients that really are on multiple combinations of medications like benzodiazepine, Xanax, with, oxycodone, things that are really lowering that depression rate, but respiration rate. But really what we're looking at, guys, again, is having to reverse engineer not only healthcare providers, but to be able to identify this out in the streets and to be able to have that conversation even at your Thanksgiving dinner table, guys. These are different, avenues and ways to be able to translate that, and we have to be able to really dial this one in. So that's what we're going to get to the bottom of. If you can talk to your patients or providers about, addressing the root causes of trauma, people will go and seek these alternative behaviors, like addictive behaviors to substances because of trauma. At the age of 14 is a very, very prime and ripe age. These are the things to be able to maybe, flesh out with people, talk to them about, be open about those kinds of things. I can definitely think back of what I thought was traumatic at the age of 14, compared to what I think is traumatic today. And granted, the scale of that is much different, but maybe it still hit me the same altogether. And really coming into
life, that is still traumatic,
So maybe particularly that didn't lead to a substance abuse case for me in that particular time, but many of my friends in those times, of course, we saw hit that at some point. And, I'm sure a lot of people either have themselves been through that the same or have seen other people go down those paths. So where we look at that, we want to identify those trauma paths. We want to identify how cannabis could perhaps be a healing thing there. For instance, one time at the pharmacy, I had a patient and he was on Suboxone and really weaning off all the way, trying to do his best to get off of his opioids and doing his absolute best. And one time we came in and it was a Monday morning and I think he was expecting some sort of a refill on like a late Saturday or Sunday and we were closed. Anyways, he came in super frustrated about not having his Suboxone, and he had actually worked himself down to this point of a really, really low dose. And I just implored to him, like, hey man, like, I get it, and you've come so far and you expect this medication, of course, all these things, but really, have you considered, cannabis? Have you considered, some of these root causes as to why that's happening? And after that, he he was able to get off that Suboxone completely. It was a weird, I guess, moment for him because I put the ball back in his court enough without making him feel, I guess, shitty about himself. And you're able to really get them to consider, hey, well, what are you going to do if the world's, completely turned against you and you don't have anything else? Could you consider cannabis? Should you? And should you have a decent approach for it? Absolutely. If you're battling with substance addiction or abuse and, really in that wheelhouse. And, at High Horse Cannabis Company, we want to be able to receive those people in all of the right lights, right? We want to make sure that we're able to understand where people are coming from, have a good empathetic conversation with them, because, to use medicine obviously implies something is being treated, right? And so we want to be sensitive to all of that, and a lot of the times it may be sensitive to the trauma that caused, the use.
Or even cause the pain. I've definitely seen it in my personal life. My mom had to combat her own personal drug use, but then fell into a life of pain and full, of trying to find relief for her cancer. And I think the biggest challenge of that was trying not to let her body resort to that medication. Because things could very easily turn bad. That addiction and naturally would come back. And we fought hard to try and get her doctors to allow cannabis use, and unfortunately, the doctor we were dealing with at the time just did not condone it. She refused. And I think that's what's important with the doctors nowadays. Our people are we don't know what our patient has gone through and has fought for, and if they have one option of life or treatment that's helping their better their life, why not allow that? And I would love to see our doctors just give more options, whether it be a homeopathic option, with plant medicine. Give them the option of that, or give them the option of prescribed medication. That's really all that's all I'd like to see, is giving people the option other than just the one prescription.
Exactly, and we need to be able to know how to advocate for our patients, ourselves, and how to educate and empower our patients and our healthcare providers to think that way as well. It's thinking different is always a new thing, and so
especially with this type of subject, it's stigmatized. So we have our older doctors who have been raised, by the book. The cannabis is wrong.
guys, we want to give you one last little video peep of an insight here about trauma and addiction, crash course on this, because it's really important that we dial in some of this and make it as applicable as possible. And cannabis has been obviously a big part in this, but we have to show you exactly how it's being approached and looked at, right? So okay.
Definitely heard of knows the story of their author, J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien was an English World War I veteran, a reluctant soldier. He joined up with a sense of duty, and he lived through the bloody Battle of Somme, suffering tremendous shock, guilt, and loss during and after the war. It took Tolkien years to process his experiences. To help him do it, he turned to writing fiction, and in time he constructed a world that helped him and all of us better understand war, human nature, loss, and growth. His novels were the byproduct of trauma, and they're among the more beautiful reminders of how it can affect us. Most of us will experience some kind of traumatic event in our lives, and most of us will exhibit some kind of stress-related behavior because of it. These symptoms usually fade, but for some, those reactions can linger and start to disrupt their lives or the lives of those around them. These reactions can develop into full-blown psychological disorders, including post-traumatic stress disorder, and in an effort to cope, sometimes addiction. But it doesn't always have to be that way. Ultimately, Tolkien was able to harness the effects of his trauma and shape them into something important and to reclaim his own life, because there is such a thing as post-traumatic growth, too. As it does with many other things, psychology approaches trauma-related disorders with different perspectives, but they all tend to ask the same questions. How do you identify and diagnose these disorders, and how do you treat them so that the patients can recover, with the understanding that they might never be the same as they were before the trauma, but they can still be healthy and happy? In a way, psychology helps patients ask themselves what Tolkien asks his readers, and what Frodo asks when he's finally safe back in the Shire. How do you pick up the threads of an old life? How do you go on when in your heart you begin to understand that there is no going back? It could be September 11th, or a serious car accident, or a natural disaster, or a violent crime that you survived but are still haunted by. Trauma comes in many different forms, and sometimes it can stick with you. When it manifests as nightmares, flashbacks, avoidance, fear, guilt, anxiety, rage, insomnia, and begins to interfere with your ability to function, it can come to be known as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. It was once called shell shock, a term used to describe the condition of veterans like Tolkien in World War I, but PTSD isn't limited to veterans. It's defined as a psychological disorder generated by witnessing or experiencing a traumatic event. Its symptoms are classified into 4 major clusters in the DSM-5. One of these clusters involves reliving the event through intrusive memories, nightmares, or flashbacks. The second involves avoiding situations you associate with the event, while the third generally describes excessive physiological arousal, like heart-pounding muscle tension, anxiety, or irritability, and major problems sleeping or concentrating. Finally, we have the 4th major symptom cluster, pervasive negative changes in emotions and belief, like feelings of excessive guilt, fear, or shame, or no longer getting enjoyment out of what you used to. PTSD patients also experience numbing, or periods of feeling emotionless or emotionally flat, and dissociation, feeling as if situations aren't real or are surreal, feeling like time is slowed down or sped up, or even blacking out. We've been discussing how anxiety and mood disorders can affect a person's ability to function, and how that impairment itself leads to more suffering and dysfunction. When any of these disorders is left untreated, sufferers may start to feel desperate to find some way to cope, and one way may be substance abuse. Unfortunately, addiction and trauma can go hand in hand, and it can be hard to recover from one without also dealing with the other. According to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, more than 2 in 10 veterans with PTSD also struggle with substance abuse problems, and 1 in every 3 vets seeking treatment for substance abuse also have PTSD. And across many studies, between 1/3 to 1/2 of women in treatment for substance abuse have experienced rape or sexual assault. For a long time, most psychologists understood PTSD through the lens of fear conditioning, or the unshakable memory of being in mortal danger and the learned responses that stem from that memory. But clinicians have also begun to recognize that for some, the disorder can also be a kind of moral injury, widening the focus to include hauntings not just of violence done to a person, but also what that person did or did not do to others. Brandon was a combat drone operator in the Air Force. He enlisted at 21 years old and spent 6 years sitting in a bunker in the American Southwest, watching Iraq and Afghanistan from surveillance drones. He watched soldiers die and people get executed. He also watched kids play, people get married, goats grazing. And when the time came, he ordered Hellfire missiles to strike military targets or people who had no idea they were even being watched. Although he was half a world away from combat, he ultimately suffered the psychological trauma felt by many on-the-ground soldiers. He was diagnosed with PTSD. Brandon suffers no fears for his own safety, but still experiences the same intrusive memories, nightmares, depression, depression, anxiety, and substance abuse of many emotionally traumatized combat soldiers. So do a lot of other drone operators. But why do some victims of trauma suffer from PTSD while others seem able to move on? Well, it's psychology, so the risk factors are complicated. Some findings suggest that there may be genetic predispositions making some people more vulnerable than others. We also know that context and environment matter. For instance, someone who has experienced childhood abuse might feel, on the one hand, more ready to deal with difficult and traumatic experiences, but on the other hand, they might be more likely to default to the suppression and avoidance in which PTSD sufferers frequently engage, which, as we've discussed in previous episodes, often makes psychiatric symptoms worsen over time. As far as what's going on in the brain, PTSD shares some similarities with anxiety disorders. For example, the brain's limbic system may flood the body with waves of stress hormones like cortisol every time images of the traumatic event bubble up uninvited into consciousness. And we've already talked a lot about how the amygdala and hippocampus are involved in those classic fight or flight reactions, which, when prolonged, can be really rough on the body. In fact, neuroimaging suggests that trauma, or the chemical processes set into motion by trauma, might actually damage and shrink the hippocampus. Since this region is also associated with how we consolidate memories, this might explain how memories associated with trauma could fail to be filed away as long-term memories and instead remain vivid and fresh through flashbacks and nightmares. If there's any silver lining to all of this, it's that some people may actually experience positive change after a trauma. Treatment and social support help some sufferers achieve post-traumatic growth, positive psychological changes resulting from the struggle with challenging circumstances and life crises. That's in part what Tolkien did. Though he suffered great trauma and loss on the battlefield, he was eventually able to use those experiences to drive those powerful allegorical stories that help not just himself, but many readers of all ages around the world. It seems that while whatever doesn't kill you might not necessarily make you stronger, sometimes it really does. Suffering can also feed on itself. Many victims of trauma try to cope through what's colloquially called self-medicating, and some can end up with substance abuse or dependence issues. Psychologists define addiction or dependence as compulsive, excessive, and difficult to control substance use, or other initially pleasurable behavior that begins to interfere with ordinary life, work, health, or relationships. This could mean over-consuming drugs or alcohol, or compulsively gambling, eating, shopping, exercising, or having sex. People with addictions may not even realize that they've lost control of their behavior for some time. Addiction can refer to a physical dependence, a physiological need for a drug that reveals itself through terrible withdrawal symptoms if the use stops or reduces, or psychological dependence, the need to use that drug or complete that activity in order to relieve negative emotions. People with addiction are sometimes stigmatized as pleasure-bound hedonists who have no self-control, but people often compulsively use substances or do things in reaction to stress and other psychological problems. For various reasons, they've been prevented from coping in other ways, or maybe they just never learned how. So in this way, addiction itself is often secondary to the more complicated matter of how a person deals with stress and difficult emotions, or what kind of stressful situations they've survived. Few will dispute that much of what makes addiction possible is chemistry, but people are different from their life experiences to their biological sensitivities, so people respond in different ways to different drugs and behaviors. Many people can drink casually or gamble once in a while without losing control, others simply can't. And people in recovery from addiction may also have different needs. Some will need to be completely sober and never again touch that drug or do that thing, while others may in time be able to regain enough control to use again in moderation. Likewise, some folks can kick the habit on their own, while others do better with or need support from professionals or support groups. Researchers in groups like Alcoholics Anonymous debate whether addiction is a mental illness, like a software problem related to thoughts and behaviors and feelings, or a physical disease, a hardware problem related to biology and genetics, or both, and even whether addiction and dependence are the same thing. Either way, it can be hard to recover from an addiction if you don't get the underlying problem treated. But some people believe that you can't treat the underlying problem without first getting the addiction out of the way. While this controversy too continues, many are moving toward a model of treating both at the same time, the so-called dual diagnosis model of treatment. Addiction that's rooted in deeper psychological issues, especially in emotional trauma like PTSD, often requires some version of dual treatment to untangle both issues. The good news is, while PTSD and substance dependence may be distressing and complex, people can begin to heal given the chance and the resources. We're amazingly resilient creatures. When nurtured with the proper support and practice, we can overcome a lot. Today, we talked about the causes and symptoms of PTSD and how trauma can affect the
So it's a lot to unpack, guys, and I think you guys kind of see what we're getting at there, right? I mean, it's not a one fits all situation when it comes to addiction. It's addiction is truly a secondary problem stemming beyond trauma, and this guy, he broke it down very well. School to relate it back to the J.R.R. Tolkien, the Lord of the Rings like writer there, how he took his
how he took it
feel and expressed it.
Yeah, you can take something and make it useful, or some, like he said, it's just about how people can deal with their emotions. And we might know someone who is very similar, and you can't have them use a certain thing too often, because whether it be drinking.
Yep, exactly, guys. And so that's going to take us right back to where we're at. Bud Tenders, we're going to get you guys flyers and more educational content on this, but we want to just continue that conversation there. So looking at how to use cannabis to actually replace opioid drugs here. This is from Dr. Dustin Sulak. He is basically one of the top cannabis doctors in the country, and he's been doing this. He has large sample studies of data that he's actually collected with his patients, in terms of having to do this. So again, we want our doctors in our area, our pain management providers, everybody, caregivers, patients, to understand that this, treatment algorithm basically exists, that you can really walk somebody through how to wean off of opioids with cannabis when your other options are like methadone and Suboxone. There's not a whole lot. So, chipping away at this, guys. First things first, how to use cannabis to reduce and replace opioid drugs. So we're going to show you guys here exactly what this is talking about, and I wanted to follow up on exactly what Bennett was saying here too. So starting, it's with a small dose, right? And this may be somebody who comes at first, or somebody might actually already be a user of cannabis that wants to just start tapering on their opioid dose. So that might be a little bit of a different, more unique situation. This is going to be more of the cannabis naive kind of setup. But again, starting low and going slow, looking for trying to prevent the ceiling effects there. But as little as 1 milligram THC below psychoactive threshold, that low doses, you don't want impairment or adverse effects. We just want to enhance the effects of cannabis with opioids. So cannabis actually helps opioids to work. There is a synergy there between THC and opioids. So therefore, that is already helping you to reduce that opioid dose. So understanding that the synergy between cannabis and opioids is what helps to bring down that dose in general should help to realize why we're talking about the approach and how to approach it, right? So again, we're talking about dose layering and the mindset part there, and how cannabis really does contribute to that. So where you're looking at your dose layering, really you're going to be using inhaled for breakthrough symptoms here. Severe pain, flashbacks, panic attacks, withdrawals, and to reduce cravings. So again, that could be flower, vapes, or dabs, right? Other than that, moving on, cannabis to enhance essential health promoting non-pharmacological activities. So where we're talking about like J.R.R. Tolkien writing, right, and using his creative expression, this is an important part to talk about, because you're saying trauma is something that you can grow from. Trauma is something that you can accept and grow from, right? So you're using cannabis to thus help stem the root cause of that trauma, which is causing the addiction to the opioids, to thus grow and promote better behavior, right? So trying to help somebody map that out for themselves on their own healthcare journey. After hearing me say it once is not going to be like you have to be like that, but we'll be, talking to you guys here in the stores and kind of making sure that we have at least our root cause identification map pretty identified, and how to help somebody get to that own place for themselves, right? How to identify what that trauma might be, how to empower the fact that it's okay that the trauma even exists, identify it, recognize it, and use cannabis to help overcome some of the, pill popping behavior, right? Or something like that. And where you can already make the argument that cannabis can be a lot safer, healthier, and be able to get your dose down. So we're using it for things like savoring, exercise, meditation and prayer, journaling and reflecting, cognitive therapies. Journaling and reflecting goes all the way up to like creative writing. That Lord of the Rings, I guarantee you J.R.R. Tolkien was a cannabis user, right? And so are some of these big philosophical guys, right? So anyways, where you really can think, hey, well, maybe somebody is really used to just popping those pills and turning into a couch potato. Well, how can you dial into the things that you liked before the traumatic event happened? How can you use cannabis to even, really bring it out, and how to enjoy it even that much more? On top of that, you're going to have your kicks from trying to bring down your opioid doses. Cannabis can help get those sleep patterns in. CBD can really be a big benefit there. Looking at the ratios here, again, select combination of CBD plus THC if possible, 1-to-1, broadly effective, well tolerated. Again, CBD can help to not experience a lot of the mental effects during the day, and THC in the more heavy dose can perhaps promote a little bit better sleep at night. But through this protocol, patients can decrease opioid doses 50 to 80%. 2-week window before to practice cannabis would be perhaps a recommended idea for some patients who haven't ever used it. But again, there's a cannabis healer.com 6-day cannabis sensitization program for opioid taper. We don't need to get that complicated into it. We really just want to make sure that people understand the steps and the why, right? As to, really looking into taking down those doses and making that argument with your healthcare provider, making it with, somebody at the family table that you want to be able to advocate for and, educate on.
And the goal would be, to reduce it. Obviously, if someone wants to completely wipe out their opioid use, that's on them and a conversation between them and their doctor. But it's proven that cannabis will help enhance the opioid effects. So why not have that talk with your doctor, or encourage that family member to have that talk with their doctor if they're already using cannabis? They're only making that opioid stronger, and it's not needed. You can reduce your intake, your dosage, similar to how cannabis, if you realize that you're getting a little too euphoric when you're consuming the entire pre-roll, or your entire gummy, you can tone that back. You don't have to take your full dosage every time. Your body is different. It's going to be different on a daily basis. So have that conversation. Challenge your family members, challenge your friends, challenge the doctor. Hell, see what they have to say.
Exactly. That's where it's like, well, don't be afraid to be a little disruptive there and a little transformative, because these are things that people aren't fully aware of yet. Back in the day when they were really aggressive about convincing doctors to get on opioids and get everybody prescribing that, we have to triple down on that, true aggressive campaign to be able to reverse the damages from the opioid epidemic. And it's, truly a place that it's a sensitive subject for most, because people are going to look at cannabis as another contributor to it, but it's not the chicken before the egg. It's the chicken is the chicken, and that's what it is. You can't,
yeah, that's a perfect way to explain it. The chicken, forget the egg. Just the chicken's got to deal with chicken stuff.
So exactly. So you cannot turn chicken shit into a chicken pot pie or anything like that here. And that's the main take home point, guys, is that opioids are not cannabis. Opioids lead to physical addiction. They lead you down bad paths. We probably, being in the cannabis industry, probably have been around people that have, went down that bad path, healed from that path, so on and so forth. But we want to promote the positive and get, that broken down in all the best ways. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to wrap this up with a couple questions from stores, and then we'll get out of here, guys.
Yeah. So today's a little different, actually. We'll be asking you guys questions. So this week, I really didn't receive many questions that kind of tuned in with today's subject. So rather than fishing for different questions that would kind of veer us on a different path, I would like to challenge you guys and create scenarios. So pick one of these scenarios and answer it. There is not a clear answer, because people are different, bodies are different, everybody's dosage is different. So first scenario, and pretend I'm a client. I'm asking you this at the window. I'm asking you this at the shop. I'm having a hard time staying asleep. I smoke my pre-roll and I get to bed. But a few hours later, I'm awake again and I do not want to get up and smoke. What do you recommend for a client that has this scenario? There could be many things. They could be weaning off, the opioids. It could be what's causing the getting awake later at night. So, there's recommendations that we can give to help ease the client in the future. So there is an answer for that, but no set answer. So
Exactly. You want to always customize that per patient and really try to get down to some of maybe their root causes, right?
for sure. Here's another one. I suffer from anxiety at my workplace. I know smoking helps, but I cannot smell or be too medicated while working. I have tried edibles and found they take way too long. What do you recommend for a client that has a scenario like this? We know that anxiety could be, based off the workplace. It could be the person themselves and their livelihood. That could be just the type of the way the person is. So asking questions to further understand how to treat the anxiety, what causes the anxiety, if they know their triggers for the anxiety. Getting to know your client and guiding them in the right way will get you a patient for life, I guess you could say. I have my patients and I've guided them through just lending an ear and asking further questions to further give a recommendation. And that's all it is a recommendation. They take it home, they try it out, they come back, they give feedback, and then, all right, well, let's try something. We're glad that finally worked for you.
Yep, exactly. And like, as you are saying there, I mean, people really could be in some specific situation where you are their confidant, right? They, imagine you work 40 hours a week in a job that you hate, and all you want to do is be able to use cannabis safely and effectively, and you want to, have the best medicine that you can, discreetly, and you're trying to have that conversation with your bud tender, like, you're going to spend your money for that one time, maybe that week or those 2 weeks, and you want to make sure that that trip was really, really worth it, right? So you need to understand, bud tenders, that people come from a place that wherever that may be at that point in time, and to take and give that time to people and recognize, those situations. So that's a perfect situation to sit there and really understand that you are a trusted advocate for that patient's health care right there.
Yeah. And the last one. My pain while at work gets pretty intense. Smoking doesn't give me relief for long enough. What do you recommend for a client like this? So there's different things to consider with these scenarios. Some already have their own consumption method or their own dosage. Some might have consumption methods that they've tried, but they don't know the full backstory of some things. And as a bud tender, you've heard testimonies from many different clients, so you have an upper hand to recommend. I've heard a client use this for this, or I've heard a client have success with trying these two items together. I've heard a success story between my coworker. It really is trying it out. There's no one fits all for everyone. So, and as bud tenders, that's where we're at. You are confided in, and we should be proud about that. And we just need to be educated and
educated, open, and giving options. You never know if you don't talk to somebody about an option that they may have never considered. Maybe they literally never considered it. So you really could wake somebody up into all types of education and opportunity there for themselves in their own little healthcare journey by just recommending something that they've never tried before and thinking of something a little bit, relevant, but a little different, right? So always good to try to kind of probe around and see where you can, help somebody, for sure.
So here's your challenge for the bud tenders. Pick one, pick all, but I do expect an answer anytime we come in. So it's a challenge. See where it takes you. Okay.
We'll hit you with some scenarios this week, guys. See you guys in the stores. Otherwise, hope everybody has a good rest of their week. Be sensitive and on it with the hydrocodone outages right now. Maybe a really good opportunity to start intercepting some of those pain management patients and get them on some cannabis. That's the great solution right there.